Hey, what's up? It's your favorite forest Puffin here. Today I'm going to be talking about different kinds of equipment and things that I use in my games, like what kind of dice, what kind of mats, what kind of markers and stuff like that, and kind of more the nitty-gritty of actually running the game and the different kinds of stuff that I use. I remember when I had first gotten into Dungeons & Dragons and I was just a player, I'm like, okay, I have a set of dice and maybe two, and then the book and a character sheet and some pencils, and I'm fine. And that was kind of it for me. But then when I got into GMing, I started having to buy more and more stuff, and the GM always needs like way more stuff than the players do. The player just needs the book and the dice and a pencil, and you're kind of set, maybe a character sheet. But the GM has to have stuff like the DMG, the Monsters Manual. They'll have their own copy of the Player's Handbook. They'll have a mat. They'll have tokens. They'll have extra sets of dice. They'll have extra pencils. An adventure. Like, there's a lot of... My purchasing habits changed when I started becoming more and more of a GM as opposed to just being a player, because now I suddenly felt like, ooh, I have a responsibility to, like, I have to make sure that everyone has a mini, which really a GM doesn't technically have a responsibility to mini, but I feel, because it's my game, I feel like I gotta have that stuff. So that was kind of when I started noticing that I had to think about, like, do I need a whiteboard? Do I need this? Do I need a book? Like, what kind of books? Like, what kind of campaigns? Mats, stuff like that. And so that's when I really started to research what kind of other things that I needed to add to the game. Starting off, what I'm going to be talking about is the different kinds of mats. As far as mats are concerned, let's even talk about why you would even have a mat, because some people like them and some people really enjoy them. I use them all the time, but other people, sometimes the game that they're running doesn't require a mat, because if you have like a 3-player game, or it's a small game, or 2 people, 4 people, and theater of the mind, everyone can remember their positions, or you're just not running something where position really is as crucial, or something that's maybe even more role-playing, not as much tactical combat, a mat may not serve you that well. But I like using a mat, and for me, a big part of the reason why I use it is because when you have the little minis on there and you have different characters, it helps free up some mental real estate, because then they don't have to remember, if there's 7 people in a game, it can be really, really tough to remember exactly where everyone is and who's doing what. And then you have a lot of enemies, 5 enemies or 6 enemies, 10 enemies, wherever. And if they're moving around, it's tough to recall all of that information. Or sometimes I'll talk about a certain detail and players don't know how far away it is. And I feel like having a mat, just being able to drop some really simple stuff for some of the tactile combat, can really help to give the players more options and helps them to remember what's going on in a fight. But anyway, I personally love using mats. I use them all the time. I really enjoy them. And yeah, so, but honestly, you don't even necessarily need a mat. Prior to this video, I'd gotten a bunch of different mats and started playing with them and sort of seeing which one do I think is like the best, and experimented with them. And the funny thing was that when I first was going into making this video and trying different mats, I thought that there was going to be one mat that was just going to be like, this is it, this is the best one. But really, the fascinating thing is that with each of the mats that I tried, they each have their own strengths and weaknesses. Some are really good at one thing, and others are really good at some other things, and they all have their own pros and cons. So I'm going to walk you through different kinds of mats that I have. One of the differences between the different mats that I have is that I have some mats that are wet erase. This is it. This is a Chessex mat. This is probably this is the one that most people use. I really like them. They're nice. They have, on one side it's the squares, and on the other side they're hexes. It's a really nice feel. It's a nice size. This is the Mega Mat. The only issue is that it uses wet erase, and the reason why I don't really like wet erase is because you have to have one of those little squeegee bottles, one of those little bottles of water, and go quick, quick, and then just wipe it. Not a big fan of that, because it tends to use a little bit of paper. They tend to use quite a bit of paper towels. So originally, when I had gotten the wet erase, I was like, I kind of wanted something that used dry erase markers, because those tend to be easier to clean up. So I'd gotten this, which it comes in a tube. This is the Evergame mat. It's dry erase, so it's very easy to wipe up and clean up afterwards. You don't have to use like a squeegee bottle or something to wipe it. So that's nice. You can just use one of those whiteboard erasers on it. Problem. I don't like the texture as much, and it also curls quite a bit. If you put it into the container, it will like get stuck in the rolled form, and then you have to curl it the other way and then hold it in that position, so that way it doesn't keep rolling, and it's a little bit irritating to have to work with. Funny thing, when I use this mat, I don't put it back into the tube. What I do is I just slide it under like a piece of furniture when I'm done using it, so that way I don't have that issue. Now, if you like dry erase but don't like the curling, that's where this comes in. This is a dry erase board. Doesn't have the curling. It actually is. This is one of the panels that comes with it. Unfolds like this. Okay. It's almost like you'd see like a Monopoly game board or something like that. But yeah, so it doesn't have the curling issue, but the problem is it has creases running up and down it. And so when you're drawing on it, sometimes the pen will go into the crease and start mess up your drawing. It can get a little bit weird. But anyway, as far as other stuff that you might consider, I actually took a bit of advice from WSD20. Shout out to that channel. He actually went to Joann's and got this is furniture, like plastic for furniture. I forget what it's called. I can put a link, but this stuff is very tough. You can draw on it with dry erase, wet erase. It's really cheap. It's like under $10 for a yard, and it goes like you can get like huge quantities of it. And I even got some of it. You could take the clear stuff and you could put like gaming paper underneath it or a map, and then people could be moving around and you could be drawing on it. Like, that's cool. I even took it and I actually drew lines on it, like 1-inch squares. Problem, it does have a little bit of a curling, and it has static issues. So it has, like, when you unfold it and fold it back up, it'll get like stuff stuck on it. So it's kind of irritating that way. My friends really don't like this, actually. They prefer, their favorite is this one because it's dry erase. It's flat, and it doesn't have any of the wiping issues. So this one I think a lot of my friends really like. Honestly, it's kind of a toss-up between the Chessex, the Evergame, and the Hexers. Like, I like all the boards. I think you can't really do anything wrong. But I do know that the Evergame mat is cheaper. I think that runs around like $20. One of the other options out there is maybe just use like a blank table. And I used to do this in like Mage Knight, where you just use a ruler, and each inch that someone travels is like 5 feet. And so what you do is you put down the ruler and you say, oh, I'm going to go 30 feet. And so that's, 6 inches. And so you just move your carrot guide 6 inches up. And that works too. You don't even necessarily have to use a mat. You can just use a ruler and be moving people around by the distance. As long as people are within like an inch of each other, that's melee range, for the different attacks. I don't necessarily do that because I think that having the grid makes it a little bit faster to do the combat, because then you can say, oh, I'm 6 feet, whoop, 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 and then you can just move that distance. But I will say also having the ruler makes the distances feel more realistic, because on a grid, when you go 6 diagonally, you're technically going 6 and then 6 up. And so the diagonal movement seems a little bit wonky, whereas the ruler fixes that. But I personally, I don't have a big deal with it, but some people enjoy it. Some people like it. So that's another option out there. But anyway, we're going to be talking about the dice and the different stuff that I use. So I'm going to be switching around the camera. All right. So I got my stuff together. I'm ready. I got the camera turned around. So, hey, how's it going? All right. Everything's set up. So now I'm going to show you guys some of the dice and different things that I use when I'm running the game. Right now I got the Chessex mount out, and I'll use with the Chessex mat. Once again, you use wet erase markers, not these. These are dry erase. These will permanently stain. Where I use the dry erase markers is on the dry erase board. So you can kind of go like this. And because these ones have the eraser kind of into the head, you can go like that and erase it. And it's really nice. I'll use this for keeping track of initiative, or I have to draw something and then show it to the players. So I really like using a dry erase board. It's also portable, so it fits into a backpack fairly easily. But anyway, with the wet erase, you can, okay, let me show you one that shows up pretty easily. So is this one? Okay. So you can kind of write, what I will do, all right, I do not use a GM screen whenever I'm running a game. I will just take my notes actually on the game board. So I'll say like, oh, enemy A has 10 damage taken, enemy B has 20 damage. And so I'll just write onto the game board. Or if someone has a condition, I'm like stunned, and I'll just write it next to the figure. And then when I'm done taking my notes, I'll take out my little squeegee bottle. This is just water in a little bottle, and just wipe it. And there you go. That's how I use the Chessex, and that's what I do. But anyway, I don't use a GM screen, and one of the reasons why I don't is because it's not. I mean, anyway, most people use GM screens; they're perfectly fine. The only issue that I have is that I really want to be able to interact with the players at the table and interact with the board, because sometimes they'll tell me like, oh, can you move my figure? And if I have the screen, it prevents me from touching the board or doing anything. Plus, when I roll the dice, I actually want to roll in front of the players, because then they get to see it, and that's I find that exciting for them. So I don't necessarily use a GM screen. The only thing which I kind of hide from them is on occasion, maybe there's a die roll that they don't necessarily need to know, or if sometimes they can't see the map. So with that, I just kind of lean the map in towards me so they don't see it. And that most of the time I find that works perfectly fine. But once again, I'm a rare exception. Most people use a GM screen and are happy with that. Anyway, this is my dice box. This is what I use to run games, and we'll pop it open and I'll explain. So the dice box is, I think it's from like I think it's like a workman's dice box or something. It used to have like nuts, bolts, and different odds and bits in it. But anyway, now I use it for dice. And you'll notice that it's fairly strange. It has a very weird assortment of dice in here. You'll notice that there's a ton of D6s, these little pogs, and then a few D4s, this big die, and a bunch of D20s. So let me explain. We'll go through it. These are what I use for the different enemies. So like, oh, you're getting attacked, there's 3 guys, and I'll use them like this. I tend to not use any enemy miniatures because I run a variety of enemies, and it takes a while to kind of stock up on them, and I usually don't have time to like paint them or purchase them beforehand, and I like the imagination aspect. So I use these enemy tokens. And these D6s also get used as enemy tokens. Sometimes I'll go like this. I'll say like, oh, there's a group over here. And because they're numbered, it makes it easier for the players to see them and say, oh, I'm going to attack blue number 1 or something. So I'm going to move right here, and it makes it so that way it's easier. I'm going to attack 3, the Pog 3 or something. So having the dice, and plus because they're colored differently, you can kind of separate them into groups. So it's like, oh, these guys are going with this guy, and these guys are going with these, or the dice are goblins. I also use these as well. These I can use for inspiration, but I also use these to indicate like, oh, there's a bunch of crystals on the ground, or there's civilians, or sometimes they're another kind of enemy. And the reason why I also use these tokens is because I used to just have the pogs and the dice, only those 2. But whenever I would have civilians, players would keep trying to attack the civilians because they'd look at the board and they'd say, oh my god, it's a die, like it's an enemy. And I would just say, no, it's a civilian. And so I got a completely different indicator, so that way visually these don't look the same, so that way there aren't any accidental maiming of civilians. So that helps. Plus these guys are great for like minions, things that are really low health, that are easy to kill, or that you really don't have to, they don't need, like, you can just swarm with them, like, there's a bunch of them on the board. So that's why I use them. Now, other stuff, so another reason why I have the D6s, like so many D6s, is that these are great for like Fireball. There's a lot of spells that use a bunch of D6s. Traps will use a lot of D6s, so I really like using these. Now you'll notice I have a lot of D20s in here. Like, who's running around with like 12 D6s? Well, it has to do with the way that I run the game. whenever I run a lower level adventure, it tends to be something more traditional to what people see, where it's like, oh, I roll the die. Ooh, that's a 17 to hit. All right, a d6 plus 3, that's 8 damage. That's fairly traditional. It's what most of the time you see. But what I find is that whenever I'm running higher level games, ones where players are running around at like 10th level, 11th level, the problem is that the enemies will often throw out like 15 attacks in a round or something, or you'll have 12 enemies and each one throws out 2 attacks, or, you know, it's just ridiculous numbers. And so, and I love horde enemies. I love throwing out these big groups of enemies. And so the way that I do it is that I'll say like, okay, there's 10 enemies coming out. These 5 attacks are going for you, and these 5 attacks are going for you. So it's like you got the paladin and the barbarian at the front, and then I throw out the dice, and then I'm looking at this guy and I'm like, oh man, miss, 2 hits. Okay, and then I'll usually, if I'm doing this much, I'll take average damage. So I'm gonna say 7 damage, so 14 damage for you. And then you've got miss. These hit. Oh wow, is that 19? 19, 16. Okay, these are all really good. So that's 14, 28 damage on you. And so that's how I take 5 turns in like 10 seconds, is that I use a lot of dice, and I will just roll them all at once. And by the way, that's another thing which I do, is I only take 1 turn. I'll just say whatever is like the lowest dex and I'll roll that. And that's my initiative. So I only take 1 turn, and it's just because it gets a little bit cumbersome if I keep having to take multiple initiatives. I'm just like, look, I'm going to take 1 turn. All the guys are going to go. I promise I'm not going to have them all just gang up on one person. I'll just break them up, and that way it's a little bit easier to run. And that is how I run higher level stuff. And as you can see, it's like you got a bunch of D8s, because I think there are certain attacks that'll use like 4 D8s, and then same with D10s. So, but I'm not as concerned with them. I also have Captain Morgan. Yeah, this die is like Captain Morgan Black Spice Rum or something like that. And I really like this die. So I ended up using this die for like the boss enemy. So I'll have like boss, I'll put him down, boss, and then there's other guys going around. So there's only one of them. So the players know whenever I'm bringing that up that he's like special. So anyway, yeah, that's this die. I also have these little, where are they all? Do I have another one? Okay. I think the red one wandered off somewhere. Anyway, I have these little little tabs that kind of go onto bottles. And what I'll do is, let me pull out a mini. So what I'll do is, let's say that here's a mini. This is one of my paper minis I have. It's a horse or pony. It's a pony. I will take one of these and say like, oh, Shield of Faith on him, and I'll put it like that. And so people remember. I'll also use these as like, ooh, I marked someone, and I'll put it on them. So that way it indicates who's been marked. And these are just for battlefield indicators. Oh, also, I have these 2 dice. These are really big Chessex dice. I forget how much bigger they are, but the reason why I roll these ones is whenever I want something that's like, I usually roll these just for like dramatic purposes, where it's like, does the enemy spot you? Well, bam! And I like it because they're really big, and so the table can see what's happening. I have 2 of them so that I can do advantage, disadvantage. And because of their size, it's easier for people at the table to see what's going on and notice them and be like, ah! And whereas these ones are a little bit smaller, and so they're harder to see across the table. As far as other things that I have, other indicators, this is a bag with like little markers, some more tokens. These ones are for big enemies, like large enemies, and once again, they're numbered so that way you can see them. So that way, if the group gets jumped by a bunch of shambling mounds, oh no! And then these are the large tokens. Whenever a player, like let's say a player becomes large, I will take one of the tokens, flip it around, and then go like that. And so that indicates it's a big enemy. I do know that there are some indicators that are actually round. they have rounded edges, but I always had problems because players would sometimes go like this, like, oh, I'm in this thing. I'm like, no, it's taken up. And so I had to make them like, they're square. It takes up all 4 of these, just to indicate where they are. But anyway, yeah, so I use these bits of cardboard in order to figure out where the enemy is. So all these minis are from the NPC Codex. What these are is they're little paper things. You just they have these removable bases. I like the fact that they come with a lot of them. There's like 200 or 300 or something like that for like 40, 50 bucks or something. They are, they're nice, they're pretty. They have the removable bases. They stack easily, so you can, if you're taking them someplace, you can kind of store them like this. You don't have to worry about like the parts falling off, because I've had issues where if you have a mini, different pieces, they have to be carried in like foam, because otherwise the pieces break off. These ones are nice because they store easily, and I will run a public game like Dungeon Adventures League, and I don't know what my player's going to play, and so I'll just bring a stack of these, and then if someone says like, oh, I'm going to be playing as this guy, and I'm like, okay, cool, and we pull it out, and so that's perfectly fine. So yeah, I really like using these things. They also have large bases for some of the bigger, like a horse. Okay. And yeah, I like using them. So yeah, that's it. This is my dice, and this is the stuff that I use when GMing. Hopefully this helped you, and you can see what I do, and hopefully it might help you out. And once again, this is just one style of play. I don't necessarily think that this is particular. Anyway, hopefully this helped you out. Hopefully you got to see some stuff, and it might help you with your game. And anyway, see you guys in the next video. Bye!